Part of the pregame show, we're going to look at a movie that I watched this week that has stuff that I like quite a lot in it. Well, that's the first frame of it. Let's see. There we go. There's my scene with the GameCube logo. Anyway, the movie is titled Jubaku, and it's the secondary title is Spellbound. And initially I had no idea what it was about, and was like, you know what, this has Tetsuya Nakadai in it, and that's the value of star power. It draws people in who might otherwise not have, kind of been into something. And I watched it, and it's fascinating. It's very well done, and it answers a question that I would never have thought to ask before watching it, which is, how do you make a movie about a financial crisis in the banking system compelling and interesting? And the answers that it gives are pretty fantastic. And that's kind of what we're going to look at, because I think the storytelling style here, it's imagistic. It offers visual themes and visual perspectives, like literal perspectives on things that are uncommented upon, but that nonetheless have an impact on how the movie is experienced and kind of how you feel about the story. They're things that they're not supposed to. They're things that you can intuit meaning through. And not necessarily subject. Oh wow, that's a beautiful bird. Not necessarily subject to an analytic approach, though of course you can speak about it analytically, because that's what we're going to do now. So yeah, here we go. So the first thing that it says is, okay, so this is a movie about bank fraud. How do you make that interesting? And one of the ways that they do it is they actually borrow a few sort of stock and trade conventions from what I've come to learn are conventions in sort of like Yakuza movies when the cops start to crack down on the crooks. And it uses these moments of sort of cinematic flair where, the police storm a local, family's office, and they make a real big show of barging in. They're really chatty, they're really commanding, and they're like turning everything up, looking for evidence and carting stuff away. And that's one of the things that this movie does, which is, where's my keyboard? There we are. So these are the prosecutors coming into the bank. They've come to the very top floor. They're going to storm the executive's office, and this is very much that sort of dynamic kind of heroes coming down the hallway look that a lot of those that feels very much like the cops coming in to set things right. It has a few extended scenes of people sort of like making a big show of carting things away for evidence. Here they are bringing in the cardboard boxes and carting stuff away. And it also has the sort of, you kind of see a lot of this in like Kitano's cop movies, where the cops are extra rough on the prime suspects and things like that. And these are things that don't really show up as, they show up as story beats. And they serve to articulate one of the underlying themes that the movie does bring out explicitly, which is that this bank fraud stuff is absolutely connected to the funding of organized crime, and that the underside of societal problems, the sort of underworld, can't operate without an overworld authentication of it, funding, and that's what the fraud is about, right? The bank is giving out loans without any kind of interest, without any kind of collection or collateral, and they're giving them to gangsters, and that's where the fraud's coming from, right? Evening, Iceman Dan. Yes, white collar crime. Thank you. That is a word that is a very good, succinct summary of this problem that never occurred to me, and I'm very glad that you mentioned it. No, Phoenicia, I have not, and good evening. Thank you for giving me that title. I will look into it. But yeah, so these genre conventions, they're just little hooks, but they're genre calls that connect to the theme, which is that this is the white collar crime face, the legitimate face of underworld crime. And not in such a way where there's like a respectable business and there's somebody who is also a crime boss who's involved. It is just legitimately two worlds. This is their connection. And the genre conventions convey that sort of wordlessly, and I think that's very interesting. It also uses some persistent imagery that is largely uncommented A film about tax evasion? Well, sign me up. I mean, honestly, that's one of the reasons why this movie is actually a really good introduction for the first stream about Killer 7. Is Killer 7, Suda Goichi is a master of what I, in my parlance, call dull punk, which is where he will take concepts like civil ministries and postal services and mail order services and put them at the crux of these ridiculous conspiracies and violent feuds and things like that, and so white collar crime, these sorts of things that on their face are, you know, Enron and things like that that you might have to have a special vested interest in that world to find interesting. He absolutely a master of making that stuff interesting and compelling and making you want to look more into it. The banality of evil, yes, and then you put Dan Smith in there and it becomes comic booky and great. But yeah, so it uses persistent imagery that's uncommented upon, and probably the biggest signal is this statue, which represents Rome. This actually shows up in Animal Crossing of all places, and it also shows up. There was a gift that Mussolini, I believe, made to a town very near mine that I grew up in Georgia, that is a replication of this statue. And what this indicates, there's a myth about the founding of Rome that Romulus and Remus, the two twin brothers who were Rome's founders, were suckled by a wolf in the wilderness. And that's how they gained such strength to found a city that could be the center of an empire that could then functionally be the entire world. Whether that's geographically true or not, spiritually, conceptually, it wound up finding that grounding for many people who were in the Roman Empire. And so that's the statue. The statue is at the foyer of this bank, and I don't know if it's literally a statue in the actual location where all this stuff happened, because it is based on a true story. But for the purposes of the art, I don't think that really matters. It's kind of like the Wall Street Bull in its placement. And as you get further into the inner sanctum, you find another replica of it. There's Nakadai. He's a brilliant, crotchety old man in this who is an old crook. He's great. He's an actor who has not lost his touch as he's aged. But so you have this in the inner sanctum, right? So there's very much a Rome feel, right? That this is an empire. The financing of crime is very much what is holding this society together, at least economically. And yes, original Wolves of Wall Street. That's a very good point, and a nice turn of the image. Evening Boogle. There are only 5 of them because I have not gotten enough thin blood to unlock the other 2, and that remains to be seen how that happens. But what's interesting with this, so they have this image, and this persists across different scenes. The most interesting thing to me about this, there is a subplot where younger bankers are trying to oust the older bankers who have been responsible for this corruption that has caused this massive investigation and risks upturning Japan's economy. And this image right here, as they go down the hallway, it's a bust of just the wolf's head. And you can kind of see it here from another angle. It's just the wolf's head. And this is fascinating because the point of the Romulus and Remus statue is that Romulus and Remus, the next generation, are being suckled, they're being nourished to take over. And what you have here at the very entrance of the executive suite is the wolf, and only the wolf. So basically the parent without the child. And there's this problem of succession, right? When you have an older generation in power and they're very slow, even unwilling to relinquish power, all you have is the wolf. You don't have Romulus and Remus, there's nobody who can take over, and it winds up being a stale power structure that can only collapse, which is what happens here. And that is it's a magnificent working of this image that goes beyond the superficial sort of like identification of a certain political economic order with Rome to actually doing something very interesting with this. Yes, of course we're talking about Star Trek. What is this? I can't see. The color on my thing is very dark. Oh man, for some reason the color... Warm Visitor, thank you, that's it. Sorry, it took me a second to read the name. It meshed really well with the black. Good evening, Warm Visitor. It's good to see you. But just, let's see if we can get through this in the next couple of minutes. The next image that it uses is this of this musician, and one of the bankers says that if things keep going badly, he's going to wind up like this musician. So this musician is sort of tied right at the start, at his first appearance, with the downfall and the decline of this banking system, and it absolutely uses this image without comment at like the quarter mark, the halfway mark, the 3/4 way mark. This musician just shows up playing in this park in the center, and here it is very brilliantly framed there by the news anchor sort of taking a drink of water, and very nice framing there in that shot, and it also shows up there at the end in silhouette. And this is another really good use of just an image that it persists, that is used, that is not commented upon, and it is a structuring element, but it also has it has a meaning sort of implied and associated with it that it just sort of loosely carries out, and that's a great storytelling technique. And the final thing that is very interesting to me about how it tells its story, this is I mentioned last time about how form in poetry works to communicate information that the words themselves do not semantically convey, but when you understand the form, when you understand how it is structured and what that intends to do, then you can start to understand hidden information that is implied in there. And this is one of the ways that I think this movie does that, which is through spatial relationships. This is kind of an overview map. It's the title screen, and you can see all the major players and how they relate to each other on a map here. And the cinematography absolutely makes use of large cavernous spaces, almost negative space type framing. That like here you've got the Central Park, very nice framing through dome structure. I'm not remembering the name of that particular thing, but you can see the fountain, you can see the distance, and even here with this newspaper layout, there's a patterning here that sort of creates space, and it's not just a straight on shot. And they do the same thing in interior shots here too, right? People are populated around the edges of the room, sparsely in the middle, and there's like this relational positioning that creates a sense of space. This is just beautiful. There are several shots like this that are cavernous, where the people create points of reference for your eye to hit, and that makes the space bigger. Here as well, there's a lovely shot of a boardroom. And what's interesting is that this is like the norm for this story. And then when shots get really, really close up to the faces of people, and when the screen flattens, it means that something dynamic and interesting is happening, usually for the worse for particular characters. Like this right here is a moment where the dialogue that's happening in the background actually takes a turn for the worse, and you can see what it does there, right? It compresses the distance, it closes the space, and it makes it just a little bit flatter. And here you have Nakadai in a car. This is kind of a rare scene where everything is up really compressed, and he's not a happy man. And that's an instance where everything is close. And here's another shot of him, again, where he's not happy. And you have this very close shot through the framing of the back of a chair, and it makes the space flat. Here is another one where he's enraged, and it does this weird mosaic patterning that makes it flat like a painting. And it's like all of these moments are connected with the old order collapsing. It's like distance becomes two-dimensional, and that's where change happens. And probably the most sort of like on-the-face illustration of this is this moment here, which is right before his downfall. It has this beautiful shot of him against his house, and then it fades out, and then there's the spider web. And the spider web, besides the clear imagery of getting caught in entanglements, it's a flat image. It's flat, it is the surface of the screen, and that is exactly the point of his downfall. And that's a way where form is used. When things become flat, when things become close quarters, that means that things are becoming more dynamic. Things are stirring up, and something big is about to happen. And that's a use of form. It's illustrating, kind of giving you information about the story that the actors and the script aren't giving you themselves. So yeah, and that sort of compression of 2D space into 3D space is absolutely something that Suda Goichi does in Killer 7, and I'm really excited to jump into that, so let's go do that. Evening Dream Bombs, good to see you. Thank you so much for the subscription. Let me catch up here. Romulus Smith, yes, Romulus Smith. I hope to unlock him. That's the Killer 9, right? Tokyo Drifter, I can see that. I mean, I can absolutely see a Seijun Suzuki influence on this. I mean, at least in terms of storytelling style. The sort of like removal of action from context that tells you a story about action while hinting at context without really giving you a bigger picture, so you're not 100% sure what the full story is, but you have enough to enjoy. I can absolutely see that.